My wife, Laura, told me she wanted an open marriage on an ordinary Tuesday night. We'd finished dinner, halfway through a banal conversation about our workdays, when she nonchalantly suggested it. At first, I thought she was joking. Then I registered her steady gaze, the way her hands trembled just a little on the table. I asked her to repeat herself. She complied, voice calm, eyes dead serious. My heart thundered. Her request was so out of the blue, it felt like she'd physically hit me. We'd been married for 5 years, and suddenly, she was opening a door I'd never imagined. Laura explained she wanted to explore different connections without ending our marriage. She claimed it would spice things up. She'd read articles about couples forging deeper bonds through open relationships. I stared at her, stunned. Initially, I tried to be understanding, to let her voice her thoughts without my immediate judgment. Part of me wondered if this was a passing fancy. But her tone, quietly determined, suggested otherwise. We sat in tense silence, the hum of the fridge and distant traffic buzzing between us. Finally, I managed to say, "Let's talk about this rationally." She nodded, face set in resolve. We moved to the living room, a place that had once been cozy for our late-night chats. Now, every cushion on the couch felt stiff and foreign. Laura began by outlining why she felt unsatisfied, though she insisted it wasn't my fault. She said marriage had grown monotonous, that she needed variety and freedom. My stomach twisted in knots, insecurity gnawing me. Had I failed her somehow? She insisted otherwise, praising my loyalty and kindness. Yet it felt like a paradox. If I was so wonderful, why was she craving someone else's company? She promised me this would be beneficial, an act of trust. Over the next hour, I listened, struggling to keep my composure. She proposed boundaries, ideas on how we'd remain transparent about other partners. She claimed it would strengthen our emotional connection, if we handled it correctly. Yet I couldn't shake the sense of betrayal. I considered whether she'd already found someone. When I asked, she denied it. But her eyes flickered, a subtle sign I suspected was a lie. The conversation ended in exhaustion. I agreed to think about it, to let the idea settle. I didn't want to make any rash decisions, though my heart felt battered and bruised. That night in bed, Laura drifted off easily, as though she'd unburdened herself. I lay awake, my thoughts spinning. Were we truly on the brink of an open marriage? I tried to recall when intimacy between us started feeling stale. Yes, we'd fallen into routines, but so did many couples. Could we fix that in ways other than inviting third parties? I tried not to resent her for broaching it. I knew some couples thrived under open arrangements. But I'd never imagined myself in that scenario. Anxiety churned in my gut. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping for sleep that wouldn't come. Morning arrived with little solace. Laura went about her usual routine, preparing coffee, humming softly. She kissed my cheek, as if unaware she'd dropped a bombshell the night before. I felt a simmering frustration, unsure how to express it. Her demeanor suggested she believed I'd eventually accept her plan. A part of me seethed, wondering if she'd ever cared how I might feel. I forced myself to get ready for work, letting the tension between us remain unspoken. At the door, she whispered, "I love you," searching my face for reassurance. I mustered a weary nod, unable to form words. At the office, I struggled to concentrate. My mind replayed her proposal, riddled with conflicting thoughts. I confided in my friend, Russ, explaining only that my wife wanted a radical shift in our marriage. He raised an eyebrow, suspecting the meaning. He offered no judgment, just an ear. Still, I divulged few details, feeling conflicted about airing private matters. On my lunch break, I strolled outside, phone in hand. Out of habit, I checked social media. My messages were quiet. Then I considered a hypothetical: if Laura wanted freedom, maybe I should explore, too. The concept both intrigued and saddened me. Returning home, I expected more discussion, but Laura acted like nothing had happened. She greeted me with a warm smile, cooking dinner. I tried to talk about her idea, yet she dodged specifics, saying, "We'll figure it out." My frustration grew. How could she make such a life-altering request, then behave so casually? That night, we watched TV in near silence, neither speaking of the looming subject. Eventually, I excused myself and went to our bedroom. My mind bristled with unanswered questions. As I lay there, I began to wonder if her desire for an open marriage indicated deeper issues between us. The next day, memories of that conversation gnawed at me. If she wanted an open marriage, maybe she already had someone in mind. My imagination conjured images of her flirting with strangers, slipping away for clandestine meetups. The thought burned. I realized I was either going to resent her or try to match her stride. My phone beckoned, a portal into possibilities. I told myself maybe I should see what else was out there, if only to test the waters. After all, if she was already checking out, was I not entitled to do the same? I felt oddly reckless. That evening, Laura casually mentioned going out with friends. She didn't invite me, nor offer many details. Suspicion prickled my nerves. After she left, I opened my phone, scrolling through old contacts, friendships I'd let fade. Then I went online, venturing into social media spaces. I wanted to see if flirting felt natural or forced. At first, I felt guilt, but her words, an open marriage, echoed. Maybe this was what she really wanted. Maybe it would keep me from feeling bitter. So, I drafted a friendly message to someone I'd known in college, testing the waters of reacquaintance. To my surprise, the reply came quickly, warm and eager. Her name was Zoe. We'd been good friends, briefly flirtatious, though life pulled us in separate directions. Now, we caught up on old memories, exchanging updates about careers, families, ambitions. The conversation flowed, surprisingly comfortable. My heart fluttered with the thrill of attention. I wondered if this was how Laura envisioned open marriage, a series of harmless, exciting connections. The idea seemed less terrifying now, though I still felt uneasy about what it meant for us. Nevertheless, I found myself lingering over messages, grinning whenever Zoe's name popped up. Over the next week, my rapport with Zoe grew. We chatted daily, jokes and confidences slipping back into an easy rhythm. I didn't share that I was still married, unsure how to explain it. Guilt pinched me, but Laura's push for an open marriage rationalized my secrecy. Meanwhile, Laura remained elusive about her evenings out. We shared polite small talk at home, groceries, bills, mundane chores, but avoided deeper intimacy. At times, she'd grin mischievously, as if enjoying a private secret. Part of me wanted to confront her, but another part echoed, "She wants open." So, I let her drift. One Friday night, Zoe proposed meeting for coffee. My pulse quickened. I had no reason to refuse, if Laura was stepping out too. Yet, admitting I was still married, even if open, felt daunting. Ultimately, I mustered the courage and told Zoe the truth. Her reaction was a mix of surprise and curiosity. She'd heard of open relationships but never participated in one. I tried to explain the short version of how Laura and I reached this point. Zoe listened, concern in her voice, but said she'd respect my situation. She still wanted to meet, leaving the choice to me. Nerves fluttered in my stomach as the day approached. I told Laura I had plans with an old friend. She didn't pry, just nodded with a slight smile. On Saturday, I drove to the cafe, heart pounding. Zoe was seated by the window, wearing a friendly smile that set me at ease. We embraced, the warmth of her body momentarily stilling my anxiety. We talked for hours, sipping lattes, reminiscing about our past, and sharing new stories. She radiated a gentle confidence, making me laugh in a way I hadn't in ages. It felt surreal, stepping into a world beyond my marriage. As twilight fell, we strolled outside, the city lights twinkling. Conversation flowed, occasionally dipping into personal territory. She asked if I was truly comfortable with an open arrangement. I confessed I wasn't sure. Part of me felt compelled to try it just because Laura insisted. Zoe nodded, her eyes empathic. She didn't push or judge, merely offering companionship and understanding. After walking me to my car, she lingered. We hesitated, our gazes locked. Then, tentatively, she leaned in and kissed me softly. My mind whirled with conflicting emotions, guilt, excitement, relief. In that moment, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. When I returned home, I found Laura in the living room, scrolling her phone, a glass of wine on the table. She greeted me with a light, questioning glance, but didn't probe. I felt a pang of resentment. Why did she seem so unconcerned? Didn't she care about what I'd done or who I'd seen? We exchanged a few pleasantries before heading to bed separately. Lying in the dark, I replayed the kiss with Zoe, feeling warmth spread through my chest. Yet beneath that warmth lay confusion. Was this truly what our marriage had come to, finding separate comfort in other people? Days passed, and I continued seeing Zoe. Each outing felt more natural than the last. We saw a movie, tried a new restaurant, texted at odd hours. A genuine connection was forming, surpassing mere flirtation. Meanwhile, Laura's nights out grew more frequent, her phone a constant companion. Despite my misgivings, I stopped questioning her. She'd opened this door, and I was walking through it, discovering a deeper bond than I anticipated. One evening, I realized I genuinely looked forward to Zoe more than any time spent with Laura. That revelation both thrilled and unsettled me. At home, Laura seemed oblivious or uninterested in my emotional shift. She assumed we both enjoyed the newfound freedom. Perhaps she believed I'd only indulge in casual flings, nothing that threatened our marriage. But Zoe wasn't a fling. Our connection deepened daily, conversations cutting to the core of who we were. I found myself confiding in her about my fears, insecurities, and hopes. She listened, offering her own vulnerabilities in return. The thought crossed my mind, what if Zoe was better for me than Laura had ever been? The notion rattled me. I still felt loyalty to my marriage, but it wavered. One afternoon, Laura casually mentioned she'd met someone named Jason. She said they'd gone out a few times, had some fun. I pressed for details, uncertain how I'd react. She offered vague mentions of drinks, laughter, a shared interest in hiking. My stomach churned, jealousy rising unbidden. Yet, she reminded me this was part of our open arrangement. Her voice held an edge, suggesting I had no right to judge. I forced a polite nod, though my mind screamed conflict. How bizarre it was, dividing ourselves into separate romances. I wondered if we'd ever truly return to each other. That night, I confided in Zoe about Laura's new partner. She observed my bitterness, gently suggesting that maybe this was Laura's real motive all along, to be with Jason without losing me. The words stung, though they resonated with my suspicions. Zoe's concern for my well-being contrasted sharply with Laura's casual approach. As Zoe held my hand, I felt safe, understood. Yet guilt spiked. I was drifting further from my wife, emotionally and physically. Still, Laura had initiated this. If she wanted her separate path, why shouldn't I pursue mine? The thought both calmed and terrified me. Increasingly, I noticed Laura's disdain when we were together. She seemed preoccupied, glued to her phone, texting Jason. We rarely shared affectionate gestures anymore. Even the simplest touches felt forced. Our marriage had mutated into two parallel lives. One evening, while she dressed to meet him, I watched in silence. She caught my gaze in the mirror, shrugging off my unasked questions. Later that night, I found myself messaging Zoe, longing for her warmth, her genuine smile. I realized I no longer felt guilty seeking comfort in her arms. My wife had effectively given me permission, though it came at a tragic cost. Zoe's presence illuminated my life in a way I hadn't expected. She encouraged my passions, listened to my stories, shared her own. We built a routine of weekend adventures, kayaking, farmers markets, concerts. I felt a blissful sense of belonging. I dreaded returning to the tension at home. Laura and I hardly spoke beyond logistical matters, bills, groceries, schedules. She devoted her spare time to Jason, returning late, sometimes not at all. Our open marriage had become a loose arrangement of parallel affairs. Each passing day, my affection for Zoe grew. My heart inched closer to admitting I wanted her more than my official spouse. One night, after returning from an outing with Zoe, I found Laura in the kitchen, tears streaking her cheeks. Surprised, I gently asked what was wrong. She confessed that Jason had ended things abruptly. He'd moved on, leaving her reeling. She looked at me with wounded eyes, as if expecting comfort. My gut twisted. A part of me felt sorry for her heartbreak, yet another part seethed. She'd broken our bond, chased this man, and now wanted solace from me? I swallowed hard, offering a few hollow words of sympathy. She reached out for a hug, and I stiffened, uncertain how to respond. Laura cried in my arms, lamenting the open marriage's messy consequences. She whispered that she missed our closeness. I felt a spark of pity. Perhaps she realized how fragile our connection was now. But beneath my compassion lay resentment. She'd insisted on this arrangement, found her fling, and now that he'd left, she was suddenly remorseful. I recalled the warmth I felt with Zoe, the genuine bond we'd nurtured. I managed to guide Laura to bed, letting her sleep off her grief. As she wept into her pillow, I stood in the doorway, feeling more distant from her than ever. In the days that followed, Laura attempted to reconnect. She suggested dates, movie nights, tried cooking special meals. Her phone usage declined, her attitude softened. She apologized for neglecting me in favor of Jason, admitting she might have taken our marriage for granted. I listened, but a numbness settled over me. I'd found another path, a woman who valued me in ways Laura had dismissed. Part of me contemplated giving Laura another chance. After all, we had a history. But whenever I pictured our shared future, I felt an emptiness that overshadowed fond memories. Meanwhile, Zoe's presence loomed large, a bright alternative. My resolve to stay married wavered daily. Laura and I had once shared a vision of growing old together. Now, that vision felt tainted by her demands for open exploration. She'd shattered my trust. Even if she regretted it now, the damage was done. Zoe's unwavering support and genuine affection stood in stark contrast. I decided to have an honest conversation with Laura. After dinner one evening, we sat at the same table where she'd first mentioned an open marriage. I looked into her eyes, gathering courage. I explained that my feelings had changed, that I was no longer sure I wanted us. She listened, tears forming, as I detailed how her pursuit of an open arrangement left me feeling discarded. I told her about Zoe, how we'd connected, how I felt genuinely seen and valued. Laura's breath caught in her throat, shock registering. She'd known I was seeing someone, but perhaps she never realized how serious it was. My voice trembled as I admitted I wasn't certain I could repair our bond, even if she wanted monogamy again. The moment felt harrowing, a harsh mirror reflecting the consequences of her initial choice. She lowered her head, quietly asking if we could try therapy. I promised to consider it, but I sensed my heart wasn't in it anymore. Her tears continued, yet she no longer demanded I fix things. Maybe she recognized how far we drifted. We slept in separate rooms that night. I woke the following morning, my mind buzzing with doubts. Therapy might help us discover if anything remained worth saving. But I also felt a tug toward Zoe, whose presence calmed and inspired me. Could I still be loyal to Laura while my heart tugged in a different direction? The struggle seemed insurmountable. I went to work, carrying a heavy emotional burden. That day, I confided in Zoe about Laura's plea for therapy. Zoe's voice held no anger, only understanding. She wanted me to be certain, to avoid regrets. Her acceptance of my dilemma only endeared her to me more. She said she'd support whatever path I chose, even if it meant stepping back so I could mend my marriage. I felt grateful, but the mere thought of losing Zoe stung deeply. My marriage and my new connection were irreconcilable. One had to end. The question tormented me, which path would lead to genuine happiness? Laura or Zoe? The choice weighed on my conscience. I attended a therapy session with Laura, a tense hour spent sifting through our issues. The therapist probed our motivations, asked about the timeline of her open marriage request. Laura admitted she'd flirted with Jason before broaching it to me, hoping I'd acquiesce. Her confession cut me, confirming she'd orchestrated the scenario for her personal gain. I seethed quietly but tried to remain calm. The therapist suggested we consider whether trust could be rebuilt. I answered honestly, I don't think so. Laura's face crumpled. Once the session ended, we drove home in silence. She knew my mind was nearly made. At home, Laura spoke in hushed tones, apologizing for her deception. She pleaded for another chance, promising fidelity if I stayed. But I recalled nights she spent with Jason, the casual way she flaunted her newfound freedom. The scars ran deep. In a quiet voice, I told her I needed space. She nodded, understanding I was on the verge of leaving. I packed a small bag, explaining I'd stay elsewhere for a while, needing clarity without daily reminders of our fractured relationship. She cried, but didn't protest. Perhaps she knew pressing me further would only hasten my final decision. Driving away, I felt a complicated blend of sadness and relief. Memories of our shared life kept surfacing, holidays, anniversaries, quiet evenings. Yet all those memories were overshadowed by the shock of her open marriage demand. I checked into a modest hotel, letting the solitude envelop me. Late that night, I messaged Zoe, explaining the situation. She offered to let me stay with her, but I declined. I needed time to think, alone, without leaning on either woman. My mind churned, weighing the potential outcomes of divorce or an uneasy reconciliation. Outside, rain pattered against the window, echoing my melancholic thoughts. Days passed in that hotel room, a haze of reflections and phone calls. Laura texted often, pleading for updates. I responded sparingly, still unsure. Meanwhile, Zoe sent gentle messages, reminding me she was there if I needed her. My heart ached for Zoe's warmth, yet I hesitated. The decision to end a marriage wasn't trivial, despite the damage done. I reached out to a lawyer, gathering information about legal steps. Each conversation solidified how real this was becoming. Could I truly walk away from a 5-year marriage? Yet, each time I imagined returning to Laura, bitterness and resentment stirred. Finally, I met with Laura again in therapy, hoping to see if any spark remained worth salvaging. But the session felt forced. She insisted she'd do anything to reverse the damage. The therapist prodded me to voice my emotions. I confessed I'd found emotional fulfillment elsewhere, that I no longer believed Laura's change of heart was genuine. Perhaps she just feared abandonment now that Jason was gone. A heavy silence followed, broken only by Laura's soft sobs. The therapist asked if I could forgive. I said I wasn't sure. My gut told me my trust was irreparably broken. Leaving the session, I realized I felt no compulsion to comfort Laura. Guilt, pity, and exasperation swirled in me. She made her choices, disregarding how I'd feel. Now, the consequences were unfolding. That night, I messaged Zoe, asking if we could talk in person. She graciously agreed, inviting me to her apartment. Anxiety blossomed, uncertain what future I could promise. But I wanted honesty. When I arrived, she welcomed me with gentle warmth. We sat on her sofa, the room lit by a single lamp, shadows dancing on the walls. Quietly, she asked where my heart lay. I inhaled, then confessed I couldn't mend my marriage. Too much trust had been shattered, replaced by resentment. Zoe nodded, sadness and relief mingling in her eyes. She asked if I was sure. I said yes. My decision was to pursue divorce, to free both Laura and myself. Tears pricked my eyes, acknowledging the loss of a life once cherished. But in Zoe's gaze, I saw hope. She didn't push me into promises. Instead, she said she'd support me through the transition, letting me heal and define what I wanted with her. We held each other, a fragile solace in the storm. The next day, I initiated the divorce process, informing Laura via a calm but firm conversation. She sobbed, begging me to reconsider. My heart clenched at her anguish, but I stood firm. I explained how trust eroded, how her initial pursuit of an open marriage, fueled by Jason, had left our bond irreparable. She said she never dreamed it would come to this, that she thought we could handle open relationships. But her tears couldn't change the core issue: she'd broken us, and I'd already found someone better suited to me. The realization stung both of us. Time became a blur of legal paperwork, dividing assets, and unraveling shared responsibilities. We agreed to keep things civil, splitting finances amicably. While the process wasn't pleasant, we avoided vindictive fights. Laura once more apologized, teary-eyed, but the sincerity rang hollow after her months of prioritizing someone else. I felt numb, pushing forward with finality. I kept my living situation separate, oscillating between hotel stays and brief nights at Zoe's. Zoe never demanded I move in or declare a new relationship status. She gave me space to find my equilibrium, a kindness that deepened my appreciation for her. When the divorce officially finalized, Laura moved out of our apartment, leaving me to handle the last of the lease. Standing in empty rooms, I reflected on the ghost of our marriage. Photos once hung here, souvenirs from vacations, evidence of laughter and intimacy. Now, the walls were bare, echoes of a life I once knew. I surprised myself by not feeling more grief. Perhaps the months of strife had dulled the pain. Instead, I experienced a tentative lightness, as though freeing myself from a painful charade. I locked the door, deposit forfeited, and walked away from that chapter forever. Zoe and I proceeded cautiously, aware that I needed time to adjust. Over the following months, we grew closer, forging a bond rooted in honesty. I confided in her about my lingering doubts, my regrets, and my hopes. She reciprocated with her own vulnerabilities, forging a partnership grounded in empathy. We shared countless moments of laughter and genuine affection, something I hadn't felt in years. Reflecting on the chaos that began with Laura's open marriage proposal, I acknowledged the ironic outcome. Her desire to explore other people led me to discover someone better. Life, it seemed, had a strange sense of humor. Occasionally, Laura's memory resurfaced in my mind. Sometimes, I wondered if she found solace or regret in the path she chose. I heard from mutual friends that she'd been single, perhaps reflecting on mistakes. Part of me hoped she learned from the ordeal. I bore no hatred toward her, only a resigned acceptance. We were incompatible, our marriage doomed the moment she chased an open arrangement for selfish reasons. My bitterness had faded into a mild compassion. Meanwhile, I cherished the new life I was building with Zoe, whose authenticity and warmth made each day a welcome adventure. Seasons changed, and Zoe and I hit milestones, a road trip together, meeting each other's friends, discussing future possibilities. My trust in her grew steadily, fed by mutual respect. We didn't rush formal commitments, content with steady progress. I continued therapy on my own, sorting through lingering insecurities left by Laura's betrayal. The sessions helped me heal, teaching me to recognize my self-worth. My counselor commended my resilience, reminding me that open communication, not secrecy, formed the bedrock of healthy relationships. I found closure in the recognition that Laura's choices reflected her own restlessness, not my inadequacy. Months later, I crossed paths with Laura unexpectedly at a coffee shop. We exchanged polite greetings. She looked subdued, offering a small, regret-laced smile. She said she heard I was with someone new, that I seemed happy. I nodded, returning a polite, measured grin. A flicker of sorrow crossed her face. Perhaps she realized she'd triggered the end of our marriage. We parted amicably, no dramatic confrontation. Later, I told Zoe about the encounter, feeling only mild nostalgia. I appreciated how far I'd come, from resentment and confusion to peace and renewed joy. In the year that followed, Zoe and I naturally gravitated toward living together. It wasn't a rushed decision, but a gradual merging of our lives. We found a cozy apartment, decorated it with collaborative taste, each piece reflecting our unity. I marveled at the contrast to my previous marriage, which had devolved into rigid resentment. Now, each day felt like a shared journey, fueled by mutual respect and honesty. The label of better sometimes echoed in my mind. Zoe was simply more in tune with what I valued: communication, loyalty, genuine warmth. She never needed an open arrangement to feel fulfilled. My divorce from Laura ended abruptly, but the lessons it taught lingered. Love thrives on shared understanding and transparency. The moment secrets breed dissatisfaction, the foundation cracks. Laura's push for open marriage revealed deeper fractures between us, ultimately leading me to Zoe. Some might call it fate, others serendipity. Regardless, I felt gratitude for stumbling into a healthier partnership. My life had transformed, no longer defined by monotony or disconnection. In quiet moments, I thanked whatever cosmic forces aligned to guide me from one door closing to another opening wide, revealing a love I never imagined. Zoe met my parents, who welcomed her warmly, relieved to see me genuinely happy. My mother even noted how relaxed I seemed compared to my final months with Laura. We laughed over dinner, sharing stories. Zoe's confidence meshed seamlessly with my family's warmth. I found myself reflecting on the stark difference between this comfort and the tension I'd felt with Laura in her last year. Life felt richly textured, each day an opportunity for new experiences, rather than a stagnant routine. Perhaps we needed storms to appreciate tranquility. I treasured Zoe's companionship, recognizing the fragile beauty of love's second chance. One evening, we curled up on the couch, discussing the future. Zoe asked if I ever regretted how things ended with Laura. I pondered, then admitted I regretted the pain but not the outcome. Had I stayed, I'd be entangled in a marriage built on shaky ground. Her open marriage concept had demolished our trust, leaving no sustainable path forward. Meanwhile, meeting Zoe through that turmoil was an unexpected gift. It felt disingenuous to call the divorce a blessing, but in a convoluted way, it led me to a brighter horizon. Zoe squeezed my hand, her smile radiating understanding. Over time, I regained my sense of self, forging a life driven by genuine emotional exchange. Zoe and I built traditions. Sunday brunches, movie marathons, spontaneous getaways. My old anxieties about whether I was enough for someone melted away. Her unwavering affection and open communication reassured me constantly. In glimpses, I recalled how Laura first broached the open marriage, how stunned and powerless I'd felt. Now, I reveled in the opposite: shared decisions, mutual respect, clarity. The difference felt night and day, as if I'd stepped from a dark alley into a warm, welcoming light. Friends and colleagues noticed my transformation. They saw me smiling often, engaging enthusiastically in work and social events. No longer did I bear the weight of unspoken marital tension. While I never boasted about the circumstances of my divorce, I was candid if asked. I'd share that Laura pursued an open marriage, and ironically, that openness led me to someone better. People found the story intriguing, sometimes scandalous, but I no longer flinched. The shame and sorrow I once felt had evolved into acceptance. Life's twists can be unexpected, sometimes cruel, yet they can also deliver unexpected blessings. One day, curiosity prompted me to check Laura's social media. She'd posted inspirational quotes about growth and healing, interspersed with photos of solo adventures, hiking, traveling. She seemed to be finding her own path, though I sensed loneliness between the lines. I felt a pang of pity, hoping she found peace. Our story had ended, but each of us continued writing new chapters. Sighing, I closed the app, returning my focus to the life I'd built with Zoe. Dwelling on Laura wouldn't help either of us. I placed my phone aside, determined to remain anchored in the present. Months trickled by, each day filled with small joys. Zoe and I faced typical challenges, budgeting, chores, minor disagreements, but always addressed them openly. I felt a deep gratitude for her willingness to talk through issues rather than hide them. In one candid conversation, I admitted how Laura's betrayal once shaped my fears. Zoe reassured me that we'd tackle any concerns together, never resorting to silent discontent. That commitment to honesty fueled my hope. I realized I was closer to Zoe in 1 year than I'd been to Laura in 5. Sometimes, connections simply align differently, revealing how love truly feels. As time advanced, Zoe and I decided to adopt a puppy, a shared responsibility that tested and strengthened our partnership. Caring for a lively bundle of fur demanded teamwork, late-night potty breaks, vet appointments, training sessions. We navigated these challenges with laughter, celebrating each small victory. The puppy filled our home with playful chaos, symbolic of the vitality lacking in my former marriage's stagnant routines. Late at night, as the puppy dozed between us, I gazed at Zoe, silently thanking fate for leading me here. My wife's open marriage plan had shattered illusions but opened a corridor to genuine, reciprocal love. One brisk autumn evening, Zoe and I sat on a bench in a quiet park. She rested her head on my shoulder, the puppy curled at our feet. Crisp leaves fluttered around us. With a thoughtful sigh, Zoe asked if I ever truly forgave Laura. The question lingered. Eventually, I answered that forgiveness was complicated. I didn't hate Laura, nor did I fully excuse her actions. But I'd accepted the choices she made, which freed me to pursue my happiness. Zoe nodded, her breath warm against my neck. Our conversation drifted to the future, imagining travel plans, dreams of a shared home. We decided to move into a larger place, with a fenced yard for the puppy. Packing boxes, sorting belongings, I stumbled upon reminders of my past, files from my marriage, old photographs, a legal document finalizing our divorce. Rather than bitterness, I felt only a wistful twinge. Shaking off nostalgia, I continued packing, eager to create fresh memories with Zoe. We signed the lease on a charming house, full of sunlight. Moving day brought exhaustion and excitement. That night, we collapsed together on a couch, boxes stacked high around us, the puppy sniffing new corners. Life felt wide open, brimming with promise. In the following months, we hosted friends for dinner parties, turning our house into a cozy sanctuary. Conversations flowed late into the night, laughter bouncing off walls. Guests often commented on our synergy, how naturally we complemented each other. I realized I'd never heard such remarks about my marriage. Perhaps back then, we wore masks of contentment, masking cracks that grew too large to ignore. Now, my happiness was unforced, and Zoe's eyes shone with the same glow. Though I sometimes pondered life's unpredictable path, I no longer questioned my decision. Love, I learned, shouldn't feel like an obligation but a celebration. Eventually, Zoe and I took a long weekend getaway to a scenic lodge overlooking a tranquil lake. We hiked forest trails, drank hot cocoa by a roaring fire, and watched sunsets reflect on the water's surface. One evening, we strolled the shore, hand in hand, the sky fading into pink and gold. We paused to watch ducks glide across rippling waves. In that hush, I turned to Zoe, heart full. I whispered that she'd helped me rediscover genuine love. She smiled, eyes brimming with tenderness. We kissed under the twilight, the moment a testament to what can bloom after heartbreak. Returning home, life continued its steady pace. Work demands, social commitments, small domestic projects. Through it all, Zoe remained my partner, confidant, and muse. Sometimes, I recalled how Laura's request for an open marriage had triggered this journey. She'd wanted freedom, and in turn, gave me the impetus to explore my own. Ironically, it led me to Zoe, someone far more aligned with my values. I carried no animosity for Laura, only a quiet gratitude that her decision unintentionally guided me here. The puppy, now grown, scampered joyfully around the yard, symbolizing our contented life. We had built something beautiful. Friends teased that I'd emerged from a marital disaster with a renewed spirit. I couldn't argue. My transformation was stark. I once clung to a crumbling relationship out of habit, but Laura's push catapulted me into introspection. Rediscovering myself allowed me to recognize Zoe's value. Our bond didn't rely on forced excitement or hidden agendas. Each day, we learned how to communicate, ensuring no unspoken dissatisfaction lingered. I realized love thrives in honesty's light, not in secret corners. Ultimately, my wife's open marriage desire freed me to open my own heart's door, finding a partner who genuinely cherished me. On a chilly December evening, Zoe and I sat by our fireplace, the pup snoozing at our feet. She snuggled against me, flipping through a photo album of our shared adventures, camping trips, spontaneous road journeys, intimate gatherings with friends. She looked up and asked if I was happy, truly happy. Without hesitation, I said yes. My mind flashed to the earlier days of confusion and pain, how uncertain I'd been when Laura first mentioned her plan. Now, all that felt distant. My life overflowed with warmth, purpose, and a companion who valued me wholeheartedly. I held Zoe closer, whispering gratitude. Some nights, shadows of the past flickered briefly, reminding me how easily I'd once felt powerless. But I discovered my voice, my boundaries. I learned that relationships should uplift, not confine. If Laura had never suggested an open marriage, perhaps I'd still be stuck in mediocrity. Instead, I'd stepped through that open door, eventually choosing a partner who matched my heart. Late one evening, I wrote a note in my journal, capturing my final reflection on the ordeal. She wanted an open marriage, so I opened my DMs and found someone better, someone who showed me love without conditions. And I've never looked back. Over time, the memory of Laura faded into a footnote, a chapter in my life that taught me resilience. Occasionally, I'd hear updates through mutual acquaintances, though none that stirred me. She seemed to have embarked on solo travels, occasionally dabbling in brief relationships. I wished her well, hoping she found whatever sense of freedom she craved. I chose not to dwell on her trajectory, content with my own. My life now revolved around sincere partnership, stable affection, and mutual respect. The lessons gleaned from heartbreak propelled me into a future I found immensely fulfilling, side by side with Zoe. Each morning, I woke to sunlight filtering through our curtains, Zoe breathing softly beside me, the dog curled at our feet. A simple, comforting scene. The ghost of my former marriage no longer haunted me. I recognized that sometimes life's biggest upheavals pave the way to profound joy. My story began with a wife's shocking request, leading me down a tumultuous path. But that path led me to a love so much richer than I'd known before. Gazing at Zoe's peaceful face, I smiled. I'd turned a painful pivot into a fresh horizon, embracing a love that truly completed me.